07-08, 1944, Mortain, Normandy. Dawn lifts like a gunmetal lid, and the bocage breathes cordite. On the maps at Kiev-na Panzer Corps, the arrow to Avranches looks clean, bold, inevitable. And up there, coming in low over hedgerows and orchard lines, are the machines that the Axis laughed at Hawker Typhoon's blunt-nosed brutes with 8 unguided rockets slung like plumbing under their wings. The verdict from German crews and early war airmen had been smug and simple. A failed interceptor, a clumsy ground attack stopgap noise without precision. That confidence is about to become a casualty. A forward controller keys his radio, the cab rank stacks answer, Typhoons roll into the dive site, dancing wings shuddering, then the sky rips. 8 60-pounders streak down, not elegant, not guided, not surgical, but war at Mortain is not a surgery, it's a schedule. Columns that must move by minute now freeze by instinct. Drivers swerve for the hedges, half-tracks spit men, soft skins torch. Tracks stall and bunch at the choke points that artillery has already numbered. The Axis mocked the weapon because it missed a tank too often on a range. The Allies built an ecosystem where too often multiplied becomes enough salvos, enough sorties, enough hours stacked overhead to break tempo and nerve. That is the deadly correction to the joke. On 07 August 1944, at Mortain, the thing they scorned as crude proves perfect for a battlefield that rewards only weight speed and repetition. The laugh line ends here under a rain of rockets nobody bothered to make beautiful. Roll back the clock to the seasons when the Axis wrote the rules of fear. In the air, slender Messerschmitts climbed like rapiers. On the ground, long-barreled Panzers and 88s defined the geometry of killing. The philosophy was precision and pedigree optics that sliced distance gunnery tables, memorized engineering admired even by enemies. Armor kills armor, artillery kills courage, aircraft harass. That was the catechism. And it seemed to work from Poland, through France, through early Russia, where movement and shock married to method. In that worldview, Allied quantity confirmed the stereotype crude heavy derivative. A fighter with a fat chin and trouble at altitude, what could that do to a Panther's sloped plate? An unguided rocket that wandered in crosswind, how could that rival an 88's measured breath? The Axis trusted craft over capacity, single-shot excellence over industrial rhythm. Even as Allied factories rewired warfare into logistics and tempo, many German commanders still believed daylight movement could be managed. Columns dispersed, bridges rushed, and counterstrokes timed between bomber tides. That confidence framed Normandy hedgerows as armor dusk, as Ally precision, as salvation. Against that creed, the Typhoon arrives inelegant, relentless, and when yoked to radios and numbers, exactly the wrong answer for men who still thought battles were decided by perfect shots instead of unstoppable routines. From the Axis vantage point, the American-led air-ground machine looked noisy, blunt, and most of all, wasteful. The Hawker Typhoon, the Allies' pet hammer for low-level work, seemed to prove their point. It was born as a failed interceptor, they said, a brute with a radiator chin that spoiled its climb and a thick wing that traded altitude for drag. Early air combats had exposed weaknesses. Worse, 1942's structural and engine troubles, compressibility shocks, tail issues, engine fires wrote a reputation in rumor thicker than any pilot's logbook. Clumsy course, not a thoroughbred, those labels stuck. Then there was the weapon. Unguided rockets, to German eyes trained on mill-range gunnery and the cold certainty of mathematics, the RP-3 was a gambler's throw. Crosswind could bias pattern, sideslip at release, fanned dispersion. A hedgerow's geometry made a tank a coin on a table. Even Allied reports admitted that a single 8-rocket ripple rarely put steel exactly on a turret. Axis officers read those lines and with a craftsman's pride smirked. Precision kills. Imprecision wastes. The Luftwaffe taught aim as catechism deflection angles, convergence the feel of a trim aircraft when the reticle just kisses. Rockets, by contrast, felt like abdication point prey ripple. Low level was another sticking point. The Typhoon lived where the flak lived, under 1,000 meters, where every village square hid a 20mm and every orchard concealed a half-track with an angry quad. A fast, heavy fighter bomber that had to dive straight into that mess seemed to many German gunners like a gift. Come closer, the tracers wrote in the air. If the rocket missed, and by their lights it usually would, the price would be paid in shredded radiators and punctured pilots. Culture sharpened the contempt. German design philosophy, optics, metallurgy tolerances revered the single perfect shot and the elegant machine that could deliver it. Tanks with long barrels and fine sights, guns with repeatable precision, aircraft that made vertical maneuver an art. In that frame, the Typhoon and its rockets looked like a cheat code for people who couldn't be bothered to master the instrument. Why learn the violin if you intend to play the drum? Finally, they misread the arithmetic of the battlefield itself. The Axis had grown up on the operational art of movement columns that flowed by timetable bridges seized by coup de main counterstrokes launched on the turn. To such a mindset, a weapon that could not promise a kill per shot felt irrelevant. They were measuring war with a sniper's ruler. They had not yet met an enemy determined to measure it with a metronome. So yes, they laughed. At the chin intake at the wing, at the engine's old vices, at the crude rails and the unlovely tubes beneath them. They saw a bad instrument and concluded the music would be poor. What they did not see, what no range card can show, is what happens when even a bad instrument is played in an orchestra. Normandy was not a map of arrows, it was a maze. The bocage made fields into rooms and lanes into hallways with murder holes cut at elbow height. Every advance required a breaching drill. Every mile demanded engineering. Artillery could pound a hedgerow to mud and still leave a panther lurking in the next green wall. For Allied Corps commanders, the question was simple to ask and brutal to solve. How do you move an army when every daylight road is pre-registered by enemy guns and every dusk belongs to enemy counterattacks? The German solution was old and disciplined. Disperse by day, move in packets, cloak with hedges and village walls, use dusk to concentrate, strike on a tempo the enemy artillery cannot catch. Under that doctrine, the Allies faced a grinding paradox. Push hard in daylight and your spearheads bleed out under 88s and pack fronts sighted for the lanes. Slow down for safety and you surrender initiative to night raids and morning jabs that reset the day's work to zero. A single blown bridge or a stalled column could turn a core plan into a queuing diagram. The Allied answer had to be both tactical and ecological. Tactical: kill what blocks the lane right now, guns, half-tracks, strong points, so that a battalion can take the next hedgerow in minutes, not hours. Ecological: make the enemy's system for movement unreliable, so that counterattacks arrive late, short of fuel, stripped of soft-skin support, and already shaken. Artillery alone could not do both jobs at the required tempo. Mediums and heavies were too blunt for the minute-by-minute dance over sunken roads. The front demanded firepower that could be directed like a hand and applied like weather. Enter the low-level fighter bomber stationed on hastily built advanced landing grounds, armed and turned around in cycles measured in handfuls of minutes. Enter ground controllers with radios the human switchboard that could pull iron from the sky, where the next lane curved and the next orchard broke into a view of a road. Enter an aircraft rugged enough to haul ordnance at treetop height, fast enough to arrive before a column vanished, and stable enough in the dive to put a pattern where a pattern mattered. The Typhoon, maligned in its birth role, fit the hole the battlefield had carved. Its Napier engine gave it muscle where muscle counted down low on the deck, where drag is a tax and acceleration buys you survival. The big wing that offended purists carried what the problem required: bombs, rockets, and ammunition, enough to make a short piece of road into a killing ground. Most of all, it could do it again. And again. And again. The rocket crude in a pamphlet made sense inside this system. A single RP-3 salvo was not a promise. It was a pressure. It did not need to split a turret every time to achieve the operational goal. A near miss could tear open a half-track or flip a soft skin into fire. The shriek could force a column to brake too hard to bunch in the very choke points that artillery loved. A pattern could cut telephone lines and scatter escorts into ditches. Scale those effects by squads of aircraft rotating through a cab rank, each cooled down in sequence by a controller who saw the flow not of a duel, but of a day. The weapon's inaccuracy became in practice a saturating paintbrush for shaping traffic and time. There was also the logistics truth that rarely makes it into speeches. Rockets and bombs could be manufactured, shipped, and bolted on in ugly, relentless abundance. Fuel tires, rails, armorers, an entire second army without uniforms made sure the next sortie was armed before the previous pilot finished his debrief. If the problem in Normandy was that everything took too long, breaching, clearing, regrouping, then the solution had to be a form of violence that could be applied on call and at scale without pause. Industry doesn't simply build weapons, it supplies a tempo. So the Allied strategic problem at Normandy's lanes and villages reduced to this: impose a daily routine the Germans could not keep. Deny them the comfortable mathematics of move at dusk, gather in cover, strike by schedule. For that you need a flying hammer with a radio leash, An aircraft that can be put where the map bottlenecks right now, then replaced over the same bottleneck 10 minutes later, then again an hour after that, until the enemy's timetable is rubble. Typhoon, with RP3's X in our equation, was introduced as the first true scalable answer to that routine. Not because it slew tanks with surgical certainty, but because it damaged the one asset the German army could least afford to lose time. It turned midday roads into coin tosses. It exposed the fragility of soft-skin logistics that armored glamour tends to hide. It punished the habit of using hedges as a cloak by making the exits from those hedges lethal. And when a counterattack like Mortain demanded a sharp, punctual blow, the cab rank could turn punctuality into wishful thinking. The untold problem was tempo. The initial solution was to buy tempo with air power that behaved like artillery on wings. In the bocage, where every field felt like a room with a locked door, the Typhoon was not the key. It was the battering ram that arrived every time you called and sometimes before. They did not set out to build a tank killer. They set out to escape a dead end. In the wartime sheds of Kingston and Langley, Hawker's factories of rivet thunder and hot oil, the Typhoon began life as an impatience. Sidney Cam's team knew the Hurricane's gifts were running out against the new speeds the war demanded. They needed an interceptor that could claw up to altitude bite bombers and outmuscle the Messerschmitt's climb. They chose power as their path. Power meant the Napier Sabre, a 24-cylinder sleeve valve brute that promised more horsepower than politeness. It was an engineer's gamble, the kind you take because the calendar is louder than the caution. The Sabre arrived like a thoroughbred with a mean streak. It could drag a heavy airframe off the grass and keep pushing when the air thickened near the deck. But it also coughed spat and occasionally tried to devour the men who trusted it. Early Typhoons cracked tails in high-speed dives, engines flamed, exhaust stacks glowed like confession. Flight test notes, read like a diary of negotiated truces, strengthen the tail, fix the elevator buffet, tame compressibility, give pilots a machine that wouldn't punish them for doing their job. Across the shops, the wing took shape thick, strong a barn door to purists, but a gift to armorers. It could carry 4 Hispano 20mm cannon with the ammunition to make a field tremble. It could carry bombs in pairs. And crucially, it could carry things Hawker hadn't yet named. The chin radiator that offended aesthetically did its work pragmatically, feeding the Sabre's appetite for cooling and making the Typhoon instantly recognizable, an advantage later when ground troops learned to cheer it and not duck from it. By 1942, the Royal Air Force had a machine that did not belong to the cloudline jewels it had been built for. At altitude, it sulked. At low level, it came alive fast in the thick air, savage in acceleration, stable in the dive, a gun platform that felt like a fixed emplacement you could hurl at a problem. Pilots discovered it the way soldiers discover a tool on campaign, by using it for the job at hand rather than the job on paper. First, it guarded Britain's shores against tip-and-run raiders. Then it ran fighter sweeps and ground strafing across occupied France. The foe took its measure and adjusted. The Typhoon was not invincible. But the men who had to bulldoze through flak at 500 feet understood a simpler truth: this machine could carry heavy things to a very specific piece of earth very quickly. The impossible idea did not spring from one man's eureka, but from a coalition of needs. Army commanders needed something that could be called like artillery, but arrive faster than a gun, line could be dragged forward. Air staffs needed a close support method that did not depend on the rare symmetries of perfect weather and perfect timing. Operational researchers wanted a way to saturate a small target area without wasting a day's flying on a sniper's dream. Somewhere between the Air Fighting Development Unit ordnance offices and hard-pressed squadrons, an ungainly thought acquired shape: if you cannot guarantee a single-hit guarantee, so many near hits that roads and nerve fail anyway. A 3-inch rocket solid propellant, fins you could bolt on with cold hands, and a warhead that came in flavors: high explosive for soft targets, semi-armor piercing for hard ones. The RP3 did not flatter the mathematician, it flattered the quartermaster. You could make many. You could ship many. You could train a ground crew to hang 8 of them in a rain squall and still turn the aircraft in time for the next call. And unlike a bomb, which demanded a larger dive and a more exact hand to place rockets, could be rippled, released in pairs, then again, laying a rectangular promise across a lane, a hedgerow exit, a bridge. Trials were not kind in the way publicists like. On the range, a single aircraft's ripple against a tank-sized target was humbling. Crosswind moved the pattern, a sloppy sideslip widened it. A pilot's heartbeat put inches in the sight picture that became yards at the ground. Engineers tightened tolerances, pilots tightened their drills. But the truth remained, rockets were not surgeons. Yet in those trials was the seed of acceptance. When additional aircraft joined the run, when ripples overlapped, when the target was not a single tank, but a mixed column trying to make a schedule, the statistics became a different animal. Misses still did work. Near misses still made fire. The system began to look like a habit rather than a hope. The Typhoon embraced the role because it had no pride to injure. It had been mocked already. Now it would be used. Squadrons learned the cab rank loiter, stacked by altitude, one aircraft at a time, called down by a controller on the ground who could see what mattered: a road fork, a village edge, a line of black dots slipping hedgerow to hedgerow. Engineers bolted on rails, riggers learned to check leads, armourers practiced until their hands knew the ritual in the dark. The language changed too. This was no longer the poetry of dogfight memoirs, this was the prose of logistics and timing. Wheels down, refuel, rearm, airborne, repeat, repeat until an army moves. Factory fixes turned into field faith. Fish plates and structural reinforcements calmed the tale. Engine handling matured under mechanics who could listen to a sabre and predict its moods. Cockpit tweaks made the sight picture cleaner in dirty air. The Typhoon's reputation dragged behind it like a shadow, but the men who strapped into it noticed a different measure: survivability in the zone where ground fire is a certainty. It could take hits and still answer the throttle. It could dive hard and pull clean. It could carry the rockets without turning into a stone. It was not beautiful. It was useful. By mid-war, the map aligned with the machine. The invasion plan demanded advanced landing grounds cut into Norman Field's ALGs that put fighter bombers minutes from the front. The shorter the supply line in the air, the more sorties a day a single airframe could fly. And every sortie was another chance to make a road impassable. A timetable impossible. The Typhoon, once a problem child in a world that worshipped climb, had grown into the favored son of a different religion: throughput. What mattered now was how many armed dives could visit a problem between breakfast and dusk, and how predictably they could be summoned. That was the genius. If you can call an accumulation of practicalities by that noble word, a marriage of a muscled airframe, a manufacturable rocket, a radio net that moved decisions to the men who could see, and an industrial pipeline that made repetition the default state. The impossible idea was not that rockets could kill tanks reliably. The impossible idea was that you could build a battlefield where they didn't have to, because the true target was not steel. It was time. And time in a hedgerow war was the most brittle armor the enemy wore. Begin at the gun sight, because that is where myths are born. The Typhoon pilot rolls in at 30-40 degrees, throttle-trimmed propeller, biting thick air. He aims not at a turret, but at a rectangle of ground through which a convoy must pass and exit from a hedge, the throat of a sunken lane, the shadowed lip of a village. The sight picture is not a bullseye. It is a geometry of probability. He will fire in pairs, 2 rockets, then 2, then 2, then 2. 8 in all. Their paths diverge gently, a man-made flock. If he is perfect and the wind is kind, those 8 lines rake the rectangle like a farmer's tines. If he is imperfect, as war makes all men, then the pattern widens and the rectangle becomes a field of near misses with teeth. Rocket dispersion, so often cited as indictment, is in this context an asset with limits. A tight pattern punishes a point, a looser one punishes a place. The bocage prefers places. Armor does not move alone. It moves with tenders, ammo trucks, fuel bowsers, signals vans, and a tail of soft skin that gives steel its legs. A salvo that does not decapitate a panther can still amputate its day by turning its fuel into a pillar of black or shredding the half-track that carries its infantry screen. Even the misses that crater a lane or bite the hedge can serve the purpose, forcing the column to halt in the exact geometry that artillery loves, bunched nose to tail, each driver watching the wrong thing, his rearview mirror. Next, the radio. The secret sauce tastes of VHF and discipline. Ground controllers, rovers, forward air controllers, men with binoculars, grease pencils, and a sense for terrain sit where the battle's traffic thickens. They talk to the stack above them, a cab rank of fighter bombers orbiting in altitudes like a spiral car park. The controller's job is triage, not simply target selection, but timing. He pulls one pair down to stun a lane just as infantry rounds a corner. He holds another in leash until reconnaissance reports a column leaving the cover of orchards. He refuses a tempting strike if it would foul an artillery fire plan due in 2 minutes. Air power here is not a performance, it is a service window. Notice what this demands of the aircraft. It must sprint, on-call accelerate to the dive, quickly carry enough ordnance to make the minute count, and then clear the area fast enough to avoid being swatted by the flak it wakes. The Typhoon's saber turns this into muscle memory on the deck, where drag right's tax law horsepower is king. A pilot who has lived through AA belts will tell you the difference between enough power and surplus power is paid in holes avoided. Now the ground loop. Advanced landing grounds / turnaround time, dispersed hardstands and pierced steel planking fuel. Bowsers placed for short taxi rocket crates stacked where armorers can haul them with human backs and a short dolly. The choreography of a sortie looks like a pit stop. Chocks in panels, open ammunition feeds, checked new rockets, slotted and wired, fuel pumped. Windscreen wiped, a last hand on a cowling, to feel heat and harmonics. 25 to 40 minutes after wheels kiss earth, the Typhoon can be pointed back at the line. A squadron's day becomes a beat fly fight service fly, the clock observed the way a monastery observes prayer. Add weather and you will find another ingredient. Low cloud that ruins a bomber's pattern can still permit a Typhoon to work the slots where hedges and roads intersect. The short transit from ALGs means opportunities can be snatched in minutes between sheets of rain and then snatched again. Strategic air forces chase windows. This system exploits cracks. Then the ordnance. The RP-3's semi-armor piercing head, about 60 pounds in name and 17 pounds of explosive in fact, is not an unthinking club. The SAP body can bite into a steel target when angle and luck agree. The high-explosive variant is an enemy of motor pools and gun crews. Armorers mix loads, some aircraft with SAP for the chance at hard targets, some with HE for the certainty of wrecking the column's nervous system. 4 Hispano cannon throw a red carpet of 20mm that chews soft targets and dares flak to keep faces up. The result is a layered attack in a single pass, rockets to break guns to rake bombs when the plan says erase. Operational research, those quiet killjoys of mythology, walks the fields afterward and takes the measure. Their clipboards record what pilots felt and what metal tells. They find far fewer direct tank kills by rocket than exuberant combat reports claim, and they publish tables that make armchair pundits smug. But they also log burnt lorries without number, slit tires, sheared telephone lines, splintered bridges, abandoned half-tracks with radios still warm. They interview German prisoners who admit that a road they once considered safe is now a question mark. They chart delays that cascade like dominoes into failed counterattacks. The spreadsheet says anti-tank guns and artillery often kill the tanks. The map says air power kills the opportunities. Strategy lives where those two statements meet. Consider the tempo math in a day like Mortain. If a squadron can fly 3 to 5 sorties per aircraft, and a wing can put dozens of aircraft over one corridor between breakfast and dusk, you are not calculating a single engagement. You are calculating pressure. Pressure has properties the enemy must pay for in attention and time. A column that halts 3 times in a day to wait out rockets will arrive at its forming up point too late for the artillery schedule drafted at dawn. A counterattack of 2 brigades that trickle in as companies is not a counterattack. It is a feeding machine for the defender's guns. Another ingredient rarely honored in headlines is predictability for friends. Infantry and armor commanders learn that when they call, someone answers within minutes. Maybe the Rovers get them a pair of guns-only strafers first, then rockets 10 minutes later, then bombs by the quarter hour. This reliability changes ground behavior. Units risk bolder moves because they know how to buy bailouts. The secret sauce seen from a foxhole is not kill probability, it is trust probability. What of survivability? The Typhoon's low-level mission lives in the envelope where flak is a constant. Here the airframe's sturdiness, the engine's torque, and the pilot's drill converge. A hit that would doom a lighter fighter becomes merely a caution and a course correction. The Typhoon's capacity to carry armor plates, self-sealing tanks, and still keep pace at treetop level keeps more pilots alive to fly the next sortie. Survivability multiplied by ALGs and maintenance crews who swap a hold panel without fuss becomes the lever that pries sortie counts upward. Sortie count is the lever that preys an enemy timetable apart. Zoom out and the final element of the sauce appears: fungibility. Rockets and bombs can be made and moved in monstrous quantities. Pilots can be trained to a doctrine that values timing and communication as much as elan. Controllers can be briefed every morning on the day's likely choke points. and the whole contraption can be replicated up and down a front. A clever trick cannot be multiplied, a system can. The Typhoon with RP3s is not a clever trick. It is a system node where industry meets tactics, meets radio. Why does this outclass the Axis approach strategically? Because it makes the battlefield's most precious currency a predictable hour. Scarce for the German side and abundant for the Allied side. Precision, the Axis's beloved virtue, wins contests, tempo wins campaigns. Precision works best when you choose the moment. Tempo steals your choice. In Normandy's green labyrinth, the Axis needed perfect minutes stitched together into a perfect morning to move a perfect plan. The Typhoon's world did not need perfection. It needed enough weight applied often enough to make perfection impossible for the other man. Even the weaknesses feed the strength. Inaccuracy, use it to saturate places rather than points. Vulnerability to flak. Attack at angles and timings that overlap with artillery lifts and smoke screens so the gunners must split attention. Weather sensitivity, base close and fly between squalls. Engine that demands care, put it in the hands of crews whose entire moral universe is keeping the next sortie on time. Every liability acknowledged and addressed becomes a known quantity, and known quantities can be scheduled. At last, return to the pilot in the dive. He does not imagine himself a duelist against a single tank. He imagines himself a gear tooth in a machine that will by day's end leave an enemy brigade where it began the morning, except with less fuel, less ammunition, fewer men, and a sick suspicion that tomorrow will be the same. He squeezes the rockets, ripple the road erupts, the mirrors of 3 drivers show flame where patience used to be, and somewhere a controller scratches out a tick on a board and calls down the next pair. That is the source. Not a secret any more than gravity is secret, but powerful, the way gravity is powerful everywhere, patient cumulative. The Typhoon is the visible part, loud and photogenic. The genius hides in the quiet things, the rails laid close to the line, the crates stacked neatly, the radios tuned the crews who don't look up when a siren wails because the only clock that matters is the one that tells them they can have the next aircraft back in the air in 27 minutes. And if you can do that again and again, then an army that thinks in shots will lose to an army that thinks in beats. 08-07-1944, Con Normandy, Operation Charnwood. Morning breaks like a pale drumskin over the Orne. The city the planners wanted on D-Day still stands wounded, but unfallen its northern suburbs, a latticework of rubble and orchards, machine gun nests threaded through cellars and crypts. Infantry forms in the lanes of St. Contest and Buron. Churchill tanks wait behind hedges that hide as much as they shelter. On the airfields not 20 minutes flying time away, the experiment becomes a doctrine. Rows of Hawker Typhoons with 8 rails apiece, ground crews feeding fins and motors from crates fuses, twisted home with wet knuckles, armorers swearing at safety pins that don't care about history. The first cab rank builds over the front like a spiral staircase. Controllers rovers, with radios tucked against their cheeks, talk to the stack in clipped rhythms, code words to turn intent into angles. The brief is not theatrical, no grand blow to end a war, only a series of small exact violences to open lanes through northern calm. The Typhoon is asked to be weather, not thunder, persistent, local, repeatable. A pair rolls in over the Carpiquet airfield, wings heavy and clean. The dive is shallow enough to keep the flak guessing steep enough to make the sight useful. A hedgerow exit at the edge of Francoville has been chewing up British attempts all morning. A self-propelled gun sits behind it like a doorman. The first ripple goes long fountains of earth and splinters, then the second catches a soft skin trying to turn, and the world becomes orange. The controller's voice is steady, lane marked. Next pair, same aim point, reduce height. You can almost hear the tempo pick up on the ground platoon sergeants, counting to 10, then 20, then waving men forward while the hedgerow still smokes. Another call Buron, column movement south of the church. The stack shifts. The next pair slides down the sun. 8 white scratches on blue become 8 hard truths in green. A half-track slews passenger door belching men. A towed pack jackknifes and blocks the very mouth it was meant to defend. A panther shows its snout, changes its mind, and reverses into a garden wall. The rockets don't win the fight, they ruin the arrangement of the fight, and that is enough for artillery to finish the sentence. The Typhoons come and go like a tide that refuses to obey the moon. ALGs make the mathematics cruel for the defenders, wheels up rockets, off wheels, down, refuel, rearm again. Ground crews, shirts dark with sweat, faces chalked with dust, turn aircraft in the time it takes an infantry company to cross a single field under fire. The pilots learn the city's grammar, where a road doglegs into a lane, where a wall conceals a gun, where a patch of cabbages hides a tractor that tows death. They are not chasing tanks for glory, they are hunting traffic for effect. Near Althi Flak begins to write its net in red and black. A typhoon takes a bite in the radiator and limps home low and angry. Another returns with a wing like a chewed biscuit and a pilot who discovers he can pray and fly at the same time. These losses are not side notes. They are the cost of living where the weapon works. And still the stack forms because the ground needs the lanes opened and the clock needs the Germans late. Afternoon leans toward evening, and with it the rhythm-established infantry moves, when the cab rank says now tanks nose through, when the rockets have made the hedges spit their teeth, artillery walks forward under a sky that answers to a man with binoculars and nerve. Charnwood does not fall to a single strike, it yields to accumulated insistence. The Typhoon's first massed performance in this theatre looks nothing like a duel and everything like logistics with claws. A city's northern apron is peeled back by repetition. By last light, the map looks different in the only way that matters. Not sweeping arrows, not cinematic collapse, just new ground, taken, new alleys, owned, new places where the enemy isn't, because he could not get there in time. Behind the front line at dispersal, a fitter runs a hand along a warm cowling, as if the machine could feel gratitude. In a trench west of Caen, a German sergeant reads a movement order that is already obsolete. That is the measure of the day. They will call what happens at Charnwood support because military language fears poetry. But for the men on the lanes, the distinction is pedantic. Something new has happened, air power that behaves like a reliable tool rather than an occasional miracle. Rockets that multiplied shape hours rather than only holes. A blunt aircraft that in its proper envelope moves the calendar forward. The first trial by fire is not a legend with a named kill. It is a schedule kept. From this day the enemy's schedules get worse. 07/08/1944, Mortain to Avranches, Normandy, Operation Luttish. Night gathers the counterattack like a fist. Orders speak the old language, surprise concentration, penetration to the sea. 11th Panzer Corps will punch Southwest Sever Patton's lifeline and make the Americans relearn humility. Engines cough in orchards, blacked-out columns nose along hedgerows. The doctrine that worked in other summers may work again if only daylight can be managed and the roads remain predictable. If only. Dawn answers in VHF. A forward controller on a hummock near Juvigny-le-Tertre watches the grey line brighten and hears the first pair check in. Cloud is ragged winds, a petty flak crews are alert. The ingredients of a narrow window, just wide enough for a habit to fit through. Target column east of Saint-Barthélemy using sunken lane to the west. Marking with smoke. The first Typhoons break cloud like thrown knives. 8 rockets go, the lane erupts. Drivers who have rehearsed boldness all night rehearse fear in a heartbeat. The column tries to reverse in a corridor too tight for second thoughts. Reports come like rain tracks on Road 62. Self-propelled gun in orchard. Bridge at La Croix-Avranches traffic, repeat heavy traffic. The stack absorbs each and leans. There is no grand plan to admire from a balcony. There is service one savage minute at a time. A Panther commander trained to think in map inches and sight reticles understands something unteachable when his battalion's soft skins vanish in flames and the ammunition truck that should have been here at 0630 is instead smoking 3 fields north. He commands steel. Steel commands nothing without gasoline and shells. Precision has met scarcity of time and discovered that scarcity doesn't negotiate. At Hill 314, a pocket of American infantry digs itself into the map and refuses eviction. German units harried by rockets and artillery, called with the confidence of men who know help, will actually come find their timetables chewed to threads. Attacks that should arrive together trickle. Orders that assumed quiet skies meet lanes watched by orbiting patient predators. Mortain is the field test of a thesis written at Caen. You do not need to kill every tank. You need to break the moment in which tanks can decide the day. For the men inside, the counterstroke realization is granular. A driver sees a white streak in the corner of a mirror and brakes too hard, turning a column into a raffle of bumpers. A gun commander watches telephone lines die and a runner sprint back into view with news already stale. A major rehearses his afternoon orders and discovers his morning hasn't ended. Fear is too small a word. The enemy feels dislocation, a sense that the relationship between intention and event has been tampered with. By midday, the language in German reports tilts from confident verbs to conditional moods. If fuel arrives, if reserves can assemble, if the bridge can be cleared, the ifs multiply like shell splinters. Above, the cab rank multiplies too. Weather breaks, then mends. Between the breaks, a dozen pairs visit the same 3 kilometers of road until the very idea of movement in daylight feels superstitious. The rockets continue their statistical humility, few neat turret piercings to please an accountant, but their operational arrogance grows. They deny geography, which is to say they deny strategy. The Axis realization is not a single shout. It is a choir of smaller concessions. Officers who mocked drums instead of violins discover that drums, when they do not stop, can break a city. A flak crew that thought of low-level fighters as quarry begins to understand that shooting down one Typhoon does not change the fact that another will be here in 7 minutes. A staff officer sketches a new approach arrow and unbidden adds 10 minutes to every leg because he has learned to fear the radio in a man's hand more than the gun in a turret. Then Falaise tightens. Retreat becomes commute. Commute becomes pilgrimage. Pilgrimage becomes cul-de-sac. The roads east of Troun and Chambois carry every hope left in western France, and the sky becomes an accountant tallying vehicles, not in kills alone, but in delays in abandoned trailers, in crews that choose ditches over orders. Typhoons, thunderbolts, lightning's names don't matter to the men below, only the continuity does. They move. The sky objects. They stop. Artillery speaks. A division tries to be a division and is treated like traffic. In the diaries that survive a few sentences, betray the pivot admissions that columns cannot be trusted to arrive whole, that counterattacks must be planned for night as a default, that open country is a kind of treason under a hostile sun. The myth of the single perfect shot remains beloved. The practice of living through a day without the schedule ruined becomes impossible. This is what defeat by tempo sounds like from inside the defeated, not howls but recalculations. By the time the pocket begins to collapse for real, the laughter has gone out of the conversation. No one is making jokes about chin intakes or thick wings. Men who mocked the Typhoon's rockets now speak of them the way sailors speak of reef's objects, without malice that nevertheless break ships. The lesson is impersonal, which makes it harsher. The enemy did not need to be perfect. He only needed to be punctual, and he was. On the airfields, armorers count empties and start the ritual again. On the roads, crews count gaps and wonder which will close next. In the sky, another pair checks in calm as a clock. The realization is complete when a corps commander lowers his pencil, looks at the day's plan, and knows that even if courage holds and guns speak and tanks lunge, there is a system above him that will tug at his sleeve every hour until the day belongs to someone else. The rockets shriek again. The hour slips. And a war that once believed in elegance discovers that survival belongs to the side that can make the next 7 minutes happen on time. Zoom out from hedgerows to the whole Western Front, and the pattern sharpens. Typhoons with RP-3s did not merely swat targets, they rewired Allied strategy by schedule. Corps and army plans could now assume a calibre repeating downpour of precision enough violence over every choke point that mattered. That certainty let ground commanders trade massed, slow set-piece attacks for quicker pulses, probe fix, call the stack punch exploit, then do it again before the defender could reset. Air became artillery that arrived faster than engineers could move a gun line and could be retasked between villages in the time it took a runner to find a company HQ. Interdiction deepened the effect. Bridges, sidings, and road nets behind the German front were harassed to the edge of dysfunction, so even when panzer brigades survived the forward fight, they starved en route to the next one. On a theatre map that shows up as a permanent lag, German counterstrokes appear thinner later, less synchronized. On the Allied side, advanced landing grounds close to the line meant sortie rates climbed with the very tempo they were sustaining positive feedback in a war of minutes. Crucially, this system scaled. Wings could be stacked along multiple corps' boundaries. Radio nets and forward controllers could be trained and cloned. Rockets and bombs could be manufactured and shipped in rude abundance. Strategy followed logistics. If you can impose a clock, the enemy cannot keep you. Make his operational art decorative. By autumn 1944, the Western campaign reads like a long experiment, with one conclusion. Tempo supplied by industry and executed by air-ground orchestration beats elegance supplied by doctrine. The machine did not just roll, it kept time, and time did the killing. After the war, the admissions came sometimes cautious, sometimes cold. We measured battles in shots, they measured them in hours. Against that, our skill became delay. A German Panzer Staff officer post-war study paraphrase. Albert Speer, reflecting on the collapse, conceded that Allied air power, fused to mass production, decided outcomes long before the last battles were fought, industry as a weapon, tempo as its edge. He admitted that once interdiction and close air support matured, German movements in daylight were no longer movements in the military sense, but risks. Paraphrase. From Normandy commanders came the more tactical truth: anti-tank guns and artillery killed many tanks. Yes, but Allied fighter bombers killed opportunity by breaking columns, wrecking softskins, and stealing the minutes counterattacks required. In their files, the language tilts from certainty to contingency: if fuel arrives, if units assemble, if the bridge holds. The Typhoon and its rockets turned those ifs into habit. So the last word is not a boast, but a ledger entry. The weapon they mocked did not need to be perfect. It needed to be present, callable, and multiplied. It was. And in a war where minutes decide miles, that was the verdict no courtroom could reverse.